Howdy, and welcome. We are today talking about Google Analytics 4 Basics. This is the first lesson of W.I.N Google Analytics 4 Basics. We're going to talk about Universal versus GA4. I am actually doing something a little different this time, which we've never tried to do. So I'm hopefully the YouTube audience works with us here. So we never broadcast these through YouTube, but we are going to for just the first lesson, because sometimes we get a request in terms of either people can't afford the Academy, we want to learn a little bit of stuff and get a sneak peek of how the courses are actually recorded live. So we thought, okay, we'll do that for lesson 1 of GA4. It's a popular topic. Lots of people need to learn about it. So we were giving out lesson 1 to our YouTube crowd. So just want to make sure that to welcome them, because it's the first time they've seen it, and it's a complete surprise because we didn't tell anybody we were doing it. The flow, for those of you who are new to the live trainings, this is how this works. The Q&A, when we're doing the Q&A, we're going to do that at the end. So you can definitely put Q&A in chat. Those of you who are here live as Academy members are the only ones that have access to the actual live training. So apologies for the YouTubers. We're not going to be able to answer questions there. But the Q&A, if you are here live, you can just pop them in the chat. If you are watching the replay as an Academy member, you have access to Ask Instructor support. Just ask that and reference this lesson. So it'll be lesson 1 of W.I.N GA4, and then ask your question there, and we'll be sure to get you your answer. Remember, Q&As are taken care of at the end of the content. So once we get through all the topics, we'll tackle the Q&A. You can also, if you'd like, raise your hand, and then you can raise your hand in Zoom. We're using Zoom for this, for the live audience. So you can raise your hand in Zoom, and then we will also will allow you to go on the microphone. You can actually just talk this stuff out, because sometimes it is easier to do that. So happy to address either question, either way that you have. Here is our schedule. So we did talk about lesson 1 being our free sneak peek for the YouTubers, our YouTube viewers that are out there. So welcome to those that are watching this. Today we're talking about Universal versus Google Analytics 4. So if you're just sort of easing into this platform, this is where you're going to want to start. Coming up in lesson 2, which is tomorrow at this same time, it's going to be Academy members only, just the normal crowd. And this is when we're going to talk about actually setting it up and then customizing it. So we're calling that activation and customization. So that'll be the foundations. We'll cover that tomorrow. In lesson 3 on Wednesday, again, this is just for Academy members, conversions and e-commerce setup. So, how do we treat goals now that they are technically not there? Big difference in Universal Analytics is Universal Analytics has goals and GA4 doesn't. They have conversions, but we'll talk all about that on Wednesday. And on lesson 4, we're going to talk about, again, at the same time, using Google Analytics 4, again, just for Academy members. That's really going through the different reports and understanding the layout of everything and some of the details of how to actually use them to pull out some story. And then in lesson 5, we will do a deep dive on a particular style of report, which you'll see a little sneak peek of today, called the explorations. So we're going to go through 3 different ones on Friday that will really help you analyze data a little bit differently, help you answer those why questions that sometimes pop up. And GA4 it's a superstar when it comes to these things. It's a big difference between GA4 and Universal, these exploration reports. So we'll talk more about those on Friday. And again, that'll be only for Academy members. This lesson 1 feature will only be for free just for our YouTube viewers, but only lesson 1. So everything else is Academy members only. All right, let's go ahead and get started, shall we? Lesson 1, Universal versus GA4. All right, now with all of our trainings, we talk about the one thing concept, because this can get overwhelming. GA4 is a completely new platform, so it's the best to think about it as it is completely new. And because of that, there's going to be lots of new one things. So just think about the one thing that maybe you heard slightly differently, or maybe something that encouraged you to think about it in a different way. Maybe it's a particular skill or tactic that you practice as you go through this lesson. Now, the 3 main topics we're going to cover, which there are 3 in this particular lesson. First, why Google Analytics 4? What is it and why now? Then we're going to talk about Google Analytics 4 in terms of the structure, and we're going to give you a tour of what Google Analytics 4 actually looks like. Then we will talk about events specifically in GA4, which is a little bit more of a focused look at the structure of GA4 and why it's so important to completely rethink how we think about events in Google Analytics. All right, we're going to go ahead and jump right in. We're going to start, of course, with lesson 1, our first topic, why GA4. We'll see you there. W.I.N Google Analytics 4, lesson 1, topic 1, why GA4. We're going to go ahead and jump right in. Let's think about Universal Analytics. I love Universal Analytics, but this is the best picture when I think about Universal Analytics. It was good. It was good for a long time. Google Analytics originally was this thing called Urchin, and they bought it and they changed it into the classic Google Analytics. And then that eventually became Universal Google Analytics. But it's been built on the same platform over and over and over again. There's only so much that platform can take. And at a certain point, it's going to break down. And that's what's happening with Google Analytics 4. Google realized years and years ago that this platform just wasn't going to be able to take us in the future. It wasn't the vehicle to be able to get us from point A to point B. The roads are changed. We need faster vehicles. We need stronger vehicles. There's a different infrastructure out there. People are using vehicles for different reasons. And so you've got to upgrade the tech. Enter GA4. It's a completely different vehicle. It's not built on the same. And there's a confusion out there, which is, I get it. Because when Google first sort of announced this, they said it was an upgrade. They said, oh, Google Analytics 4, you should upgrade to Google Analytics 4. And that implied that it was a push-button simple sort of upgrade, but it's not. It is a completely different platform, completely different structure, completely different look. You're going to see all of that in this lesson. So that's the best way to think about it. You think about GA4 being completely separate from Universal. The other reason that's so important is that you will still keep using Universal Analytics while you start using GA4. Because GA4 is a completely different platform, it has a learning curve. It is radically different, in the strongest sense of that word. And so it's going to take you some time to think through it, right? Which is why we have the course here for you. But this is the best way of thinking. You go, Universal Analytics is this, Google Analytics 4 is this. It is the thing of the future. It's going to take us into the future. Now let's talk about specifically why. So Google Analytics 4, right? I mentioned it's built to survive the future, right? It's not built for the world where Universal first was essentially created when barely anybody had cell phones. I don't think actually anybody had cell phones back in the early, maybe they just were coming out, those brick mobile phones, for those old enough to remember that. I remember that when we called them car phones because they could only be in cars. So that was back in the day. Well, now we've got, Nest thermostats and Internet of Things, and everything's got an IP address and everything's communicating with everything. It's a wildly different world. GA4 is a platform that's built to survive that world. But not just in terms of all these different devices that we all now use, tablets and computers and work computers and phones. It's built to survive this. This is the superstorm that we are all in right now as measurement marketers. Now, there are really three separate storms that are combining. The first is tech. Tech is changing. I'm sure you've heard about the iOS and Apple versus Facebook debates. Well, Apple's been doing stuff for many, many years around data privacy. So starting with Safari a couple of years back, which nobody really cared about because they weren't, Facebook didn't flip out about it, which is why it was such a big deal. But that stuff has been happening for a long time. It's been a pattern for a long, long time. You also have Google Chrome that's coming out in 2023. They are deprecating third-party cookies. So maybe that gets pushed back a little, but it is on the way. Like that stuff is going to happen no matter what. You've got browsers like Brave that are starting to pick up more and more market share. DuckDuckGo has a browser that keeps privacy and stuff like that going on. So it's just not possible to measure as many people as we once did because the tech will continue to change. This is not done. It's going to continue to do this. You also have laws. Maybe you've heard about a little one called GDPR, right? So our friends in Europe certainly have. So GDPR is a big law, but there's also Brazil's got their version of it. California recently did their version of it. The U.S. as a country is basing a version that's kind of inspired at least by California's. So there's going to be more laws, like no doubt. There will be more laws around user privacy and data privacy. And the big change here is that data used to be thought of as it was in control of the platform, and whatever platform collected the data, that's the platform that owned the data. And the laws are changing that, so it's becoming more user-centric. So it's the user is allowing that platform to use that data, but the user has control over it. The user is the owner of the data, right? And so that's where you see sort of the laws changing. Again, there's going to be more laws, not less. And that's going to cause just a little harder to measure. There's going to be less things we can measure because of laws. So now you've got tech and laws. And what's that third superstorm? It's users themselves. Users are basically standing up in droves saying, I don't want to be measured or tracked around the internet anymore. These dangerous things called cookies, right? And a lot of this there is some misinformation to this for sure. And there's some scare tactics that have been out there. But as marketers, we have not done a very good job of setting up measurement as a whole in the past. And publishers certainly haven't. And they spray ads everywhere, and they've made the sites very difficult to use. And so this is where a lot of the user kickbacks starts coming in, and users are starting to use things like ad blockers, right? So maybe they are using Chrome, and they're not in a place where the laws really matter, and so where there's not data privacy specific laws, and so that doesn't affect them. But they will not use an ad blocker coming through. So we see things like that as well. So there's lots of really important changes that are coming through, these superstorms that are all hitting us all at the same time. And where are you? Where am I we're huddled right here, right? We're right here just like hoping this thing is going to hit us. And we've got to find shelter. That is GA4. GA4 is our shelter in the storm. Let's talk about tech specifically. Now, why is GA4 so much better than Universal when it comes to the tech changes? It is easier to measure across devices in GA4, whereas Universal, you got to do all sorts of tricks. It is not meant for that world. It was never built for a world where users use multiple devices. Not really. It was made to visit sessions, right? It wasn't user focused. GA4 is definitely user focused. It understands that there is a person and that person uses multiple devices. And they're going to use them in multiple ways. And we have to figure out how to measure that customer journey when it's across multiple devices. So let's take a look at what some of this, what might look in GA4. And we're going to go into GA4 itself. Now, this is the Google Analytics demo store. I'm going to talk about how to get into that in just a second. For those that don't have access to this, everybody here watching this will be able to access this. And I recommend that you do. But as we go through this is the merchandise store. You can see this is sort of like the home screen of Google Analytics 4. So it has our reports, we'll cover some of this a little bit later on. But what I wanted to show you was the specificness of how this is really focused on users. And there's a couple of very quick ways. If we come into our acquisition reports, again, very similar to Universal in that acquisition is all about where's the traffic coming from, right? Where did users find us? How did they find us? And you can see right away there's user acquisition and there's traffic acquisition. Well, user acquisition is the user. How did I acquire a user, right? The person themselves. Traffic acquisition is session-based. So it's where did this particular session, acquire its traffic source? How did this person coming in for this particular session do that? So you already see this breakdown, how they're already putting users in the reports. Users are very top line here. Now, this used to be a setting for those old enough in analytics to remember this. It used to be a setting in Universal Analytics that you had to turn on user reporting. You literally had to hit a little switch in the back that is now default turned on. So everybody already has that. But we're used to just say sessions and you had to turn it on to say users. This is by default for users. Another way I wanted to show you this, since the admin, and remember, this is a kind of a sneak peek tour thing. So we'll be coming to this in the future lessons and deep dives. So don't worry this isn't about how to use GA4 yet. This is just a tour of it. But to kind of give you some examples of what comes through, you see this little default reporting identity here. Well, it's automatically set up for cross-device. This is using user ID. In Universal Analytics, this is something you have to turn on, that you have to assign to a certain view. In GA4, it's on by default. In fact, you have to actually turn it off if you don't want to use it. So this is how user-centric Google Analytics 4 is. As a platform, remember, completely separate from Universal Analytics, has nothing to do with Universal Analytics. There are two completely different platforms, and it's a yes and. You use both, right? Yes and. It's not either or, you use both, especially in the beginning because you're going to have to practice GA4 because it is such a radically different user interface, as you can already tell. But this just sort of showed you some very quick examples of how Google Analytics 4 is so good when it comes to this user-centric focus. It's very focused on the users themselves. All right, now let's talk about laws. Right? The whole difference between, why do we want to use GA4? Well, when it comes to laws, there's two challenges. One is, of course, just less is going to be measured, right? It's just a fact. Less is going to be measured. Stop thinking about how you can measure people that don't want to be measured and just realize you're not going to be able to measure people who don't want to be measured. That is the world that we are very quickly moving into more and more. And that's okay. We don't need to measure every single person. Remember, you don't need to know where every single fish is in the lake. You just need to know where most of the fish are most of the time. That's the idea. Truth is in the trend, power is in the pattern. GA4 gives you that. But more importantly, when it comes to this whole idea of laws, is we need a little more control over the data because some of these laws tell us to delete certain things and only hold on to certain things for certain periods of time. And Universal really wasn't built for that. It was a lot harder for Google to actually do that. GA4 is. It gives us some ability to control data a little bit. So again, if we go back into Google Analytics 4, we will go ahead and go into the admin screen just to kind of show you some of the stuff here. Under data settings, you can see there's data collection, there's data retention. So you can come through here and you can tell Google Analytics 4 how long to actually hold on to data, again, based upon your policy, your compliance policies for your own organizations. But you can see that is sitting there. And you can also determine, how much collection to actually go about using as well. You can also import data, right, which is nice. They have a nice little import data thing. And there will be more privacy features coming out in GA4. Now, they are not currently entirely out yet, but they are very quickly rolling out, I would expect. And this is a big thing on this platform. For those that are not familiar, this is the third time in a year we have re-recorded or updated, I should say, the W.I.N Google Analytics 4 Basics course. Third time in a year. The reason is because this platform changes so quickly. And I can expect that it will. We're going to have to update it again within 6 months, I'm sure. But for now, this will get us through. As far as what's coming up, maybe in the next 3 to 4 months, expect more privacy features, expect more data control features, right? That's what these things are here for. They've built it for that. They know it's coming down. They're not trying to fight the trend. Google knows they would lose that. They can see much further ahead than any of us can. And so when it comes to data control and privacy, this thing is built for it. So that's going to be really nice. We actually already took a look at that, so I don't need to worry about that. Now, let's talk about users. Users, of course, are the biggest issue because users drive all of this. Users drive the laws. Users drive tech. Because if users stop using Google Chrome because they won't be measured and tracked everywhere, Google loses out on a huge platform. They need users in there. So they want to have those, right? So users are the driving force. It's the biggest force of this entire superstorm that we are finding ourselves in with ad blockers and everything else. The reason that this is important is because every day there are less and less users that we are able to measure. Remember, that's okay. There's a thing called statistics. There's a thing called sample size. You don't need to measure everybody to get a trend, right? That's all we really care about as measurement marketers is the truth is in the trend, power is in the pattern. But that said, modeling will become increasingly important. Modeling is something that GA4 is built with, and that's where you hear things, and I'm not a big fan of these terms. Machine learning and AI, I think so many people overuse these terms. The idea of it is at the core of GA4. It was built with this idea of machine learning and AI. But the way I want you to think about this is like, who cares? That's like a buzzword. But these are engines that are built into the core of how GA4 operates, and they are built to help GA4 model what might have been. So in other words, when it comes to Google Analytics 4, this whole idea of machine learning and AI, the fact that they allow, that's the engines that are being used to help GA4 model, it can actually help you measure what can't be measured. So when you're thinking about all those users who don't want to be measured, there's ways that it can statistically sort of say, well, you probably had this many total users, even though we only measured 60% of them. Here's how this set would have worked based upon the models we have. That's the machine learning. That's the AI system that's coming in. So remember, it's built for that. It's built to help enter us and pull us into a world where we know that we're not going to be able to measure as well as we could yesterday. Every day, there's going to be a little less data that we had access to than we did the day before. This is not scary, though. It doesn't have to be. I know it can kind of freak you out. But if you think about trends and patterns, it's all you need. You just need a good enough sample size. We will have that for a long, long time. And it won't affect trends and patterns. It really won't. And you'll see that in GA4 because this platform will help to model. Now, I'm going to show you one very quick feature that came out just recently. Actually, this came out just within a couple of weeks of us doing this recording, which was really good timing. So I'm going to go into some of the Explore reports. Again, don't worry about understanding all this stuff yet. We have other lessons that will deep dive as we go through this course. But if we come into what they call an exploration report, GA4 has segments, just like Universal does. And in the segments, one of the newest features are these, predictive. This is the concept of machine learning and AI starting to be released out of its box because it's been there for years with GA4. But now it's actually being allowed to explore a little bit, and they're starting to plug it into some of these things and doing things like, hey, who's going to be purchasing in the next 7 days, or who's likely to? Who's going to be, our top spenders over the next 28 days? Who's going to be leaving our brand in the next 7 days? Who's likely to be a first-time purchaser in the next 7 days? Again, grain of salt when it comes to all these. I definitely don't just believe them because the machine told me, right? You take everything for a grain of salt. But this is the stuff that kind of is exciting because with enough data, with more, more these machine learnings and the algorithms and the AI, they all need a lot of data. But with enough data, they can figure out trends and patterns. That's all they're trying to do. And then they can start using those trends and patterns to predict, to forecast, as we teach in the measurement marketing framework, to forecast the trends and patterns, right? That's the idea. So you start to see that being released here, and there'll be more to come. There'll be a lot more to come. This is just the early release of some of this stuff. So again, GA4 getting to prediction a little bit, right? That's this AI coming in, helping us measure what can't necessarily be measured. Finally, and I'm going to show this very quickly here. I'm going to pull up our tools, and we're going to go, and I wanted to talk a little bit about how to think about Universal and Google Analytics 4. If we take Universal Analytics, and I'm just going to release this here. Give us a second. There we go. So here's a typical customer journey with Universal Analytics. So maybe somebody's on a desktop, right? Or a laptop, a desktop, a phone, and laptop at work or something like that. So you've got the customer journey, and maybe this laptop, it got a page view, but then they turned on some blockers and these page views weren't recorded. You got a desktop, which all the page views are recorded. You've got a phone where none of the page views are recorded. You've got a computer, a computer maybe at work or something where some of the page views are recorded, some not. Right? This happens. This is kind of what goes on right now. And our job as measurement marketers is to try to stitch this together as best we can to figure out what the journey is. What Google Analytics 4 essentially tries to do is take that same sort of behavior, all those different behaviors that are happening, and instead of this sort of disparate model, tries to model what's going to happen. And so it says, okay, well, these darker greens are the ones we actually recorded. These lighter greens are the modeled, right? The modeled stuff. That's the idea of this. So will it look exactly like this? Probably not, obviously. But that's the idea of it, is that GA4 is built with machine learning and AI to help us to model ourselves so we get used to trends and patterns. Now, as measurement marketers, all of you should be used to hearing that phrase, the power, that's easy for me to say, the truth is in the trend, the power is in the pattern. You've probably heard me say that hundreds of times, I hope. But now more than ever, the rest of the world is getting caught up on that because they realize they can't measure every single fish in the ocean, and nor did you ever need to because it's overkill. You just need to know where most of the fish are most of the time in order to catch fish. It's that sort of thing as we come through. So this is just an example of how they're going to be modeling coming through. All right. So with that, we have officially finished up our first topic of lesson 1, why GA4. Next, we're going to talk about the GA4 Tour in topic number 2. We'll see you there. When Google Analytics 4 continues lesson number 1 with our second topic, the GA4 Tour. Now, we're going to go ahead and just dive right into Google Analytics. Now, we've already seen some parts and pieces of this. So we start, the explorations was where we just left off at. But when you come into Google Analytics 4, you will see this. This is the home screen. The way this is generally organized, most of the reports have some sort of card-like feature that's up here, these little widgets that you can adjust sometimes, click through and sort of see different metrics as they come through. Again, I'm not a huge fan of this sort of overview stuff. I do use Google Data Studio. I still recommend everybody use Google Data Studio to build a dashboard that gives you very specific, answers very specific questions that lead to action. That's the fastest way to it. However, I also understand there is use for some of the reports in Google Analytics 4, but not this one. I'm not really a fan of this one. Also, these insights, not currently a fan of these. They don't really give you a ton of great information, but I would stay tuned because, again, with machine learning and AI getting more and more data, those tools will get smarter, right? That's part of the reason we look at this sort of stuff too. So this is here in the overview. This is what used to be called the overview reports. The real-time report is essentially what the other real-time report was in Universal. It tells you sort of what's been going on. Now, notice it's a little different here. There isn't like the last 5 minutes and the last 30 minutes. There's just the last 30 minutes now. But I do like this one better because of how it lights up everywhere. Like, this is pretty cool, especially if you send an email blast out to somebody and you want to see like, oh, everyone's hitting it right now. You turn on a campaign or something and you see the world light up. I think that's a pretty cool thing. But again, not particularly useful for answering questions other than, is this thing turned on, right? As we teach with Universal Analytics, use real-time reports to test things and make sure things are working. This is the sort of the same concept, right? In fact, GA4 has a much better way of doing that, which we'll cover in a moment. But there is real-time reports. So you can see just, hey, generally speaking, are things working as I'm expecting them to work? Then you've got the different reports. Now we're going to come in in a future lesson in this course to deep dive into these, but they're really broken into 2. There's a life cycle report and the user report. This is all about the person themselves, right? Demographics, the text they're using. This is all about what they're doing, the behaviors as we acquire, right? Where are they coming from? How they engage, and ultimately what the results are of that, how they convert, the monetization part of it. And of course, they put in retention here as well to see how long users are coming back over and over and over again. Now, the one thing I wanted to show you here, and this is a pretty cool feature. This depends upon what your business model is as to what you see. So watch what happens. When I flip this account over, and I'll show you how to get into this in just a moment. If I flip it over to this GA4 flooded account, notice the reports here and what they look like. So when I do that, see how they changed a little bit? Not much, but a little bit. Now all of a sudden it says games reporting. There's this little app developer with Firebase here. The reason this looks like this is because it's an app web stream. Again, very something different. We'll talk more about this when we go to activate and customize Google Analytics 4. But apps can come into the same place that the web page can come into now, which is kind of cool if you happen to have an app. And if you flip your settings in GA4 to tell them that you're the industry of games, this is how you get games reports. because they sort of built this and said, oh, games people want to measure different things for a game than you might for like an e-commerce store. So if you ever see yours say something like games reporting and you're like, how do I get rid of this? It's because in the back end, and I'll show you where that is just very quickly, in the back end of Google Analytics 4, when you come through and you say my industry category is, if you say games, it's going to show that. So that's why that's there. Just a little FYI. See how much we're already learning. Now we're going to come down. I'm going to flip it back into the merchandise store. This is the one that you should stick with as well, the Google Analytics merchandise store, because you can really play around with some stuff. So that's kind of the reports themselves. Again, we'll do a deeper dive on these in a future lesson of this course, but I wanted you to at least see what they look like in the overall structure. Also that there's this like two-step approach. So Universal is different, right? They just have this with the extensions. My guess, again, total guess, is that because of this, because they're widgeting it like this, there's going to be more of these coming through. So I would imagine there's some reports that you can't find, like the all pages report or the landing page report. And there's things that are a little, you might be used to seeing that aren't back here as much, but they might be coming, right, with future, because this is new and constantly evolving. But this was a recent change they did to the user interface, where they sort of have this like top nav and then the sub nav here. This makes me think there's more reports on the way, so stay tuned to that. Next, let's look at Explorer. Now, Explorer's explorations. These are here to answer why. Why are things happening? Not necessarily what's happening. That's what traditional reports, what you would use Data Studio for. These are for the whys, the breakdown. So funnels and pathing reports, explorations with freeforms. We're going to talk about all these again in a future lesson. But this whole other section exists for analysis, which is completely different from Google Analytics 4. So, completely different from Universal Analytics. It never existed in Universal Analytics. It does here, right? Universal Analytics funnels were horrible. I liked them, right? But I did not love them because they were very hard to do, and you had to get them right. When you first did a funnel visualization report, you had to build a funnel out. You could only use destination goals, and that was it. Completely different world, wide open world. I cannot wait to show you this when it comes to funnels. They're amazing. But that's the power of the Explore reports for analysis. This is a fairly new section called advertising. So here is where it's like, okay, what are the results of all this money I'm spending, right? All this advertising that we're doing. So you can see conversions that are coming through tied to different traffic sources. So very specifics. And again, AI machine learning trying to crank in here too. Take it with a grain of salt, especially when you're first starting out. But this is the idea, is that they're starting to build more focused reporting in here to help you get to answers you need a little bit sooner, whether you're the one doing the advertising or you're the one reporting to the person who does the advertising. Again, we'll cover these in a deep dive as we go through a little bit later on as well. Finally, there's the configure reports. Now, this is a little different because configure really didn't exist in Universal Analytics. There's like the admin section where you set everything up, and there's like the front end section where you see reports. Well, in GA4, it's a little different. There is kind of like this front end section where you configure your user-facing events. So you can come through here and you can do events, and we'll come back to this in just a little bit. But you've got your events, you've got conversions that, the events that you consider conversions. You can see audiences, custom definitions, and this debug view. Again, I'm going to show you how this works a little bit later on. But the idea is that this is what you think now is real time. When, as a measurement marketer, when you're setting up GA4, you're going to live in this section, because this is made just for you to be able to see your individual hits and are they coming through the way you need them to come through. This is how you actually test stuff now. Whereas in Universal Analytics, you basically just use the real-time reports and that was it. But this debugging view is amazing. It really is. It's a little finicky, right? It's a new platform, so we give it a little bit. But it is. I'll show you how to do it a little bit later on when we cover lesson 2. But this is. It's an amazing section. You're going to love being back here because you can answer all the questions you want to answer, and it's so much easier than what the old way of doing it with real-time only reports was. So with that, we can officially bring that one to a close. We just did a very quick tour of GA4. Coming up next, topic number 3, understanding events in GA4. We'll see you there. When Google Analytics 4 continues with lesson 1, our final topic, understanding events in GA4. Now we're going to go ahead and dive right back in to GA4. The reason we're going to dive into GA4 is for this section right here, events. Now I'm in the configure section and we're going into events. Now here you see every single event that is coming through. You see all the event names. There's add to payment, somebody add to shipping, somebody added to cart, somebody was an Android lover, somebody started checkout, right? Here's the campus collection user. There was a click, these different events. So this is very interesting, and it's a very big change when you think about how Universal works versus Google Analytics 4. So I'm going to bring in our little Lucid chart here. In the way it used to be, back in the before days, you had an event, right? And let's just say that event that you would have, now this is the Universal Analytics way. So an event had a category, right? So you had this event category, and then you had an event action that you got to determine, right? So you would put in the category of the event, then you would have the action of the event, and then you would have a label of the event, and then technically you could have the value as well. So most people use category action label because that's where a lot of the literally words are stored. And so that's what most people use, including ourselves. We do it for like our eyes on the journey reports, things along those lines. But with Universal Analytics, you sort of were fixed into this, right? Maybe if you had a number, an integer technically, to report, you could put it in the value section of the event. And that was it. This was Universal's way of doing this. So bring out one of my favorites, swim lanes here. So we're going to bring out a little swim lane, and we'll bring this one out. So this is it. This is Universal. And when it comes to Universal Analytics, each event is a hit. And hopefully you've heard that term before, this idea of hit. So there would be a hit, and that hit would contain the category, that hit would contain the action, the hit would contain the label, that hit would contain the value, right? So all of these different parts and pieces of the data were a hit coming across. What about page views? Page views were another completely different type of hit. So there wasn't an event type of hit. There was a page view type of hit. And that page view had its own details that sort of came with it, unless you were doing ISO customization. And then you would see other hits, like there's little timer hits that you would sometimes see come across. There were e-commerce hits that would come across, right, for reporting the transaction details or reporting the items in that transaction that were coming through. So you have all these different types of hits, right? And an event was the one that you could customize, you could play with, because you had all these different things you could put into the event itself, which made them really useful. Now, what's happening now with GA4 is that GA4 does not care about anything that it is. Not really. It just has the event itself, and then you have 25 parameters to describe that event. And again, we're going to get into this a little bit later, so I want to just talk about the concept of this now. So you have the event with 25 different things that can describe that event. And then what about a page view? Well, a page view is just another type of event that happens to be called a page view, right? That you can send 25 different parameters through, but it's just an event. So to Google Analytics 4, everything is an event. So you start with the event. There is no event category action label. There's just the event name itself, right? So it's the event and then whatever you call it. And then there's the parameters, which are the things that describe the event, that give detail around whatever that event is. So if it was a click that's coming through, that event would be named click, hypothetically. And it is. We'll go back to GA4 in just a second, and I'll show you. So in this case, the event name would be click, and then the different parameters around that click might be what page were they on, what page did they click to, et cetera, right? What type of customer were they, like all that other stuff, these different parameters that are now available for you to give to that event. So this is a completely different way of thinking about it. It's not like there's different types of hits anymore. A hit is a hit is a hit. They are all events, and events all have this sort of top level name and then 25 parameters. And you can have 500 different events that you can put in there. Again, we'll talk more about this when we go through the activation and customization of it, because there's a few things to consider there. But it's exciting because of how flexible this platform is. That said, it's harder because of how flexible this platform is, because you have to do a lot more planning, and you should be. But again, as a measurement marketer, if you've been through the measurement marketing framework, you know the first step is plan. First we plan, then we build everything out, then we launch the thing and actually start using it. But when you plan, we want to go through the questions we're trying to answer, the information we need to collect. Well, guess what? This is all the information that we're collecting, right? You figure out what the event names are going to be. Now you can see in this GA4 example of these events, they did some things that are customized, right? They have little Android lovers. That's probably customized. This little campus collection user. That's a customization. That's an event they pass through into it, right? That they came up with. When you debug, you will actually see your events come through that are coming through. Let's see if we can pull up anything here that happens to pop up. There's some here. And you can see the events and you can see the parameters that came through with the event. This is an event, was the session started. Then there was user engagement. Then there was a viewing of a promotion as they come through. And as I click on these events, you see the parameters change, and you can see what the values were as they're coming through. Here's the different parameters. Here's the values of those parameters. In this case, they were on the shop page. Here was the title of that page. It was the home page coming through. So you can start to get an idea of this data structure, right? The events all have this top level name. They have details, and then of course values for those different details. Now, as I go through, I'm going to go back into our event section here. And this is where I just want you to, at this point, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just thinking about it though. Think about the customer journey. Think about the different milestones in that journey. Think about the behaviors that the customers are taking on your site. Think about the conversation they're having with your website, with the different steps of your website. We always talk about listening to the conversation. That's what the whole idea of measurement marketing is measurement. The better we are at measurement is the better we are at listening to their side of the conversation. And then, of course, that we adjust our marketing to keep the conversation going into the way we want it to go, right? That's the whole concept of measurement marketing, is that we have to be able to really be a better listener when it comes to this. So here we've got all these different things that Google has felt in this Google Merchandise demo that has felt are important milestones. So a page view, right? Some of these are built-ins, right, that you'll see. Some of these are more customized. San Francisco user, right? A scroll item coming through here. So this is a scroll event that came through when they viewed a promotion or search results. All of these different milestones, they are collecting the different behaviors. That's how you think about events, like different behaviors, different steps in the customer journey that you feel are important, that are going to help you to answer questions around, is this website working the way it's supposed to, right? Is it matching your forecast of how it's supposed to operate? This is where GA4 really does show true power. Again, it's amazingly flexible, which is awesome, and equally as scary, because it's going to take time to plan things out. So this is why it's important, if you haven't jumped into GA4 yet, that you really start to think about it, because you're going to mess it up at the beginning. Do not try to make this thing perfect from the beginning and get all your event names right and everything else. It's not the goal. It's to think about it, get used to it, practice it for a few months, then throw it out and restart another one. And then that'll be the one used for production. That's how big this platform is. So just wanted to introduce those and hopefully think about just how events, like everything in GA4 is an event. And we have to sort of rethink our structure, our schema, as they call it. So with that, we've wrapped up topic number 3 of lesson number 1, understanding events in GA4. Now, let's review the entire lesson, Universal versus GA4. We'll see you there. When Google Analytics 4 Basics wraps up with a review of Lesson 1, Universal versus GA4. Now, remember we talked about this one thing in the beginning. What was the one thing that you got? We talked about a few different topics. First, why GA4? 100% built for the future. It is, limited in probably 80% of what Universal can do as of this recording, which is in August of 2021. So I figure it's about 80% there to a fully production platform. However, 6 months ago, it was like 50%. So there's been massive leaps that are coming up with this platform. It may not be the platform that you can use this exact moment in time. You will still use Universal. That's why it's still the yes and. You always use both. But for sure, in 2022, it's going to be your production platform. For sure, it's going to be harder to measure, and you're going to be hit with these storms if you haven't already. And you need a platform that's built for that. Universal just isn't. It's never going to be, and it eventually will be deprecated. Google Analytics 4 is the new future. And so that's why it's important to do that. It's your storm shelter as you make it through our tech, laws, and user storms that are coming our way that we're already in the middle of. We then, in the second topic, talked about a tour of Google Analytics 4. I think really just navigating the layout. There's sort of that main menu that now exists on the left-hand side. Then there's like the sub-menu of that. We saw traditional sort of reporting. Then we saw the explorations, which are a little bit more graphical. We saw the configuration section. We saw the advertising section, a fairly new section. My guess is there will be other sections that open up with time as well coming through there, because again, this platform is constantly being worked on and updated, but that is the most current snapshot of it. And then we talked about events in GA4. And this is the hardest one to wrap your head around, is that events in Universal Analytics mean a very specific part of Universal Analytics. Here, they just mean hits. It's interchangeable. In Google Analytics 4, an event is a hit is an event. They are the same thing. Everything's an event in GA4. Just like in Universal, we used to say everything's a hit, and it's just different types of hits. In GA4, everything's an event. all hits coming through are events. And you just record top level what the event is that you're trying to measure for. And then you have 25 different parameters that can describe that. So we'll go into how to set that up and think about that and give you some suggestions and training as we go through this WIN course. But for now, just realize, okay, everything's an event. I got to rethink this. This is what makes the platform so radically different. It's what makes it so incredibly flexible, which is what makes it so powerful, but also makes it something you really got to work on planning with. Because if you can't just jump in and start splashing around, you want to plan out a few things here because it'll make the data a little bit easier to get through and a little more story focused when you do run through it. All right, your next steps. Remember I told you I was going to show you how to get the demo store. This is it. If you have not already, add the Google Analytics demo store to this. We manage a link that goes directly to where you need to go. So it's measure.tips/GA demo. Now I'm just going to show you this because it is very easy. And this is just in case Google ever changes this. We didn't have to keep a link in there. So if you go to measure.tips/GA for GA demo. So what we're going to do. So measure.tips/GA demo. And then when you do that, it'll take you to this page or whatever the version of this page is in the future. It should always go to the same sort of page. When you scroll down, you click access demo account. That's it. You access demo account. Google's going to, have to be signed in with your Google account and everything else. It'll then authorize it. It'll add you as a read-only user, and you will see exactly the same stuff I do. And you will see the flooded one as well. That's the games version of GA4. This is the Google Analytics 4 merchandise store. This is the one most of us are web-based, so this is the one you're going to want. And then this is the universal analytics. So if you ever want to flip back and forth, you could. But this is the one we're going to spend our time in, this GA4 merchandise store. So please add that if you haven't already, because it is useful to be able to poke around and see kind of what they're doing and what things look like. Again, I don't think it's the perfect setup at all. I wouldn't use it as an example setup, but it's great for, I need something that's got a bunch of data and what do these reports look like when they've got stuff in them. It is fantastic for that. So measure.tips/GA demo will take you directly to that. Click that access account. It'll automatically load it up for you. So poke around that, play around with that. Remember, there is the app version, which is the flooded. I would still do that so you can see kind of what games reports are. And then the traditional, the web version, which is what we are going to be teaching for the remainder of this. We don't focus on apps here. It's all web-based measurement. So that's what we're going to be focusing on. But you have the traditional web, which is the store that you will want to play around with. Remember, the idea is not to be an expert in GA4, is to jump around and get your feet wet a little bit. Poke around the data, see what the different reports look like, see what you can figure out. Maybe some of it's intuitive. Probably a lot of it is not, because it is very different, but that's okay. That's why I want you to practice it now, get into it now, and just poke around the different reports, see the different explorations. Don't worry about being an expert in it because you're not trying to teach it to anybody tomorrow. You're not even trying to use it today. But you want to get at least a little bit familiar with some things are so that as we go through this course together, you and I, it'll make more sense when you actually see these different parts. Go, oh, that's how they got that there. Okay, I start to understand that. So that is it. That's all I want you to do right now. Now, yes, you can think about events and like what are the different type of milestones. Keep that in the back of your head. But this is the main focus. Make sure you go to the demo account. Add it if you haven't already. Again, it's totally free. You can remove yourself whenever you want. But everybody here that's watching this can do that. And please do it because you do want to see the newest things that come out, the machine learning stuff. It needs a lot of data. So Google Analytics Merchandise Store has that data. Your account might not. So you will see things in the demo store that you will not see in your own account because you don't have the data for it. That's why it's important to be able to use that account as well. And with that, you've just completed lesson number 1, Universal versus GA4. Coming up next, lesson number 2, the GA4 foundations. We're going to talk about how to activate your GA4 account. And then we're going to talk about how to customize your GA4 account before you actually start using the thing. It is very important. 2 steps. First, you activate it, then you customize it. We'll talk about both in lesson number 2. Thanks again for watching WIN Google Analytics 4 Basics. We'll see you on the next lesson. Take care. All right, now let's go ahead and dive into Q&A for anybody that is here live. You can raise your hand if you want to ask a question, and then just use the Zoom raise hand icon, which I'm sure everybody knows where that is by now. We'll let you go on the mic and feel free to talk things through. Otherwise, we'll go through chat, and you can always put them in chat if you want. That is absolutely fine as well. So, and of course, if you're watching Ask an Instructor, if you're watching this on the replay, you can just use Ask an Instructor support for Academy members. And again, apologies for the YouTube audience. We wanted to make sure this is available for the YouTube audience. It's kind of like a sneak peek of a lesson, but we're not able to answer questions for the YouTubers. You have to be an Academy member. Let's see. Keith is asking, can you still be remarketing audiences in GA4 and import them into your ads accounts? Yes. It was actually fairly recently that they started connecting in Google Ads, but yes, you can do that. So I'm just going to show some of that stuff just so you can see, because this wasn't there in the beginning. It was kind of weird. Google Ads was like one of the things that wasn't there, but you link in your ads, and the whole idea is that you can do this. But remember, it might not have all of the features that we're looking for compared to Universal Analytics, because I'm sure it's a mess for them to try to migrate some things, but 100% they are heading in that direction, 100%. Dina was asking, can you use UTM parameters with events? So yes, but in the same way that you use them now, which is a good thing. So when the event comes through, so if I go into, let's go into configure, look at our events. So, and I'm just going to make up, actually, let me see if there's one here. I can check and debug. This is not us debugging it. I'm just trying to see if somebody else is happen to be practicing debugging, which they could. Okay, perfect. So let's pretend for a moment, this person, whoever it was, came in and they used UTMs of, oh, I was from Facebook and it was paid traffic. Well, those UTMs get associated to the different hits, just like they do with Universal Analytics. So you don't have to say, oh, the UTM of first visit and the UTM is scroll and the UTM is sessions. It's like, oh no, the UTM came through. It's associated with the entire session. So all the hits, because UTM is session scoped. And then there's also that user one as well, but they would all theoretically be under, you could build a segment, say people that came from Facebook and then scrolled halfway down, it would connect the dots with your UTM. So you don't have to push through the UTM parameters again, if that makes sense, because they should already be in there. Andron's asking, so another UTM question. So I've been chatting with Julie, one of our premier instructors, our lead instructors, about improving our traffic tagging. Okay, one thing I'm considering is adding a couple extra custom parameters. Yes, so that's a great idea. So UTM placement, UTM segment for email, and store those in custom scoped dimensions. So how do these work in GA4? So in custom dimensions, this is good because I skipped this part, but only to try to keep this as high level as possible. But remember, this is the GA4 basics, but there are customizations in GA4. So you come to custom definitions, and these used to be called user properties. Some of you may have seen this first, again, in flux, right? This platform's always changing, but people hated user properties as a name, and they wanted their old ones back, which were definitions or dimensions and metrics. So they brought them back. It was the exact same thing, just renamed them. But the custom dimensions are different events. That's all these are. Custom metrics are events that contain a number. That's it. This is events that contain other details. So these are just events that you set up, and then you can pass them through. So you could have a UTM underscore placement as technically as an event, but I mean, I wouldn't do it as an event, to be honest. I would say like page location or page refer, and then push through UTM underscore placement as an additional parameter in that event is how you would do that. So it would show up as a parameter. So you could use, you can customize events and customize all day long. So for us, we would say member type, because we have member as a custom dimension in our Universal Analytics. So we created member as a custom dimension, member level as a custom dimension in we measure for that, I should say. Technically, it's a built-in, but we'll talk more about that in the future lesson. But we do measure that and customize our account so that it can tell us that. But yes, you can absolutely do that. There are the scope itself. I'll show you how to set this up, but there are, you can see there's really not the scope that we are used to thinking about in terms of like session and hit and user anymore. It's basically there's a one that identifies the user and all hits within that user, all the events that happen, and there's one just for that event. So that's sort of it. It's like, which is essentially kind of like session and user, and that's really it. It's kind of what we have seemed to do. All subject to change. So remember, third time in a year we've re-recorded this, updated this course. So as things change, but that is currently my understanding of the custom definitions. But of course, we can go through that a little bit later as well in the course. And let's see order. So basically, dimensions are labels. Yes. So dimensions and metrics. So same definition as what you would do in Universal Analytics. So dimensions are the things that you sort by. So if I come into a report here, I'll just go into one of them. This is the closest thing you're going to get. And again, we're going to do a deep dive on these a little bit later, so I'll explain more later. But you have the dimensions, the things that you sort by. It's kind of how I think about it. So it's like, these are the things you group stuff by, and you can create a secondary dimension as you come through, right? So you have that option as well. Obviously, completely different layout, but it's there. And then you've got metrics, which is the numbers. And really by the numbers, we mean arithmetic. So anything that you're adding, subtracting, dividing, or multiplying is the metric. So in this case, time is being addition, average time, and you see it's being multiplied, divided by, out, etc. So metrics are the things you're doing arithmetic with. Dimensions are the things you're sorting by or grouping by. And that's how it is. So Andron's saying, so our event level dimensions or metrics different from the 25 Parameters, yes. So an event is made up of the event name itself and then the parameter. So if I come into our debug view, which is the handy way to show this, hopefully somebody's got some events for us to take a look at here. There we go. So if I take this page view, you can see this is the event is called page view, right? They don't say event page view, it's just page view, but it is an event, which is a hit, right? That's kind of how GA4 taught. They don't call it, I mean, technically you will see them sometimes say hits, but an event is a hit is an event. There's only the one type now. This event, right? I'm using them interchangeably, happens to be called page_view, which is the name of this event. Then there are these parameters that came through with it, coming through. So including the page itself, you can see in this case it was the home page, the page location that they were on, the page title for whatever that was. And then you can see all of the different parameters associated. So that's how it works. It's sort of like, here's the different parameters, and then here's our stuff. And then user properties would be anything that's identified for customization. Again, this is a weird thing, but the custom definitions used to be called user properties. My guess is eventually they will switch this to be called custom definitions, the custom stuff. But this is user level hits that are coming through, user level parameters that are coming through. So it depends upon, and this is why it's so incredibly flexible, but you really have to put some thinking into it, is how do you want your data organized to tell what story for the dashboard, right? Whether it's GDS or even a report in GA4, you have to think that through. Because of this structure. So we'll definitely talk more about that. And we're going to be creating a tool together in this training. That'll be sort of a spreadsheet based tool to help us think about, okay, what's the event name? What are the different parameters? And the parameters you want to reuse. Like you want to be able to say, let's say page or page title in this case. Let's use the page location, probably easier. So we see like the page location, right? Where it's going to be whatever this page was. Remember, this is just for debugging. So you can see the page coming through, but what if you wanted to pull up other events that also contained that same page? Well, they would all have to have parameter of page location. Now, fortunately, it's kind of a built-in, so it's there. But if you did user property stuff, you'd have to make sure that all of the different things that you want to sort of interchangeably ask questions around had that same parameter and shared that data, so they were keyed together, right? So they had an overlap as you go through. So again, a little bit more advanced in terms of the thinking about it. But that's the idea, is that everything's an event. The event is just a label, right? The name, ideally some sort of top level behavioral based label. That's what I would think about. This is what behavior is going on. Oh, they just saw a page view. Oh, they just became a member. Oh, they are now recent, first time purchaser might be a label, right? So think about milestones that are happening in the customer journey that are important for your business model. Clicked on affiliate link, left the site, right, to go to affiliate. If you're a content marketer, engaged with content, right? Something like that might be a label like engaged or content engaged. Interested in a certain topic, right? So you could do that. So I like the idea, and we've been playing with this too. So this is in flux. But our current thinking when it comes to events is that we make them sort of top level behavioral based events, and then what are the details of the behaviors? So, they became a member. Great. What type of member? Well, that's going to be a parameter because it describes that they became a member, right? So that's sort of the idea as we go through. And again, we'll show that more as we go to set up events and then move into conversions events as well. Coming through. That's a really good question. Let's see. Just say thank you. You're welcome. Dina, most businesses aren't going to be able to set this up. 100%. Yes. You're absolutely right. Anybody that does this as a service, so a lot of measurement marketers are working either in agencies that are setting up for their clients, or they're setting up measurement services. Some of you might already be certified measurement marketers that we do in our certification training, which by the way is coming up. September 20th is going to be the class for that. So if anybody wants that, take a look at it. But holy cow, talk about opportunity. Because here's what I see. Google Analytics, again, this is 100% Google's making. I don't blame them. Let's put responsibility where responsibility goes. They came up with this thing with Universal. And when they did classic to Universal, this is the Universal view. You can see there's, views all of a sudden are back. God, I hope they bring these back. I'm hearing they're not going to, but man, it's a mistake. So hopefully views come back in. Right now they're not. But I digress. That's my little soapbox. I just want views so badly. The Universal Analytics, when they said, it's an upgrade, you upgrade your classic to Universal, you just got to change out the code. And that's all it was. And then it was like, but we've automatically upgraded your Google Analytics account and you just upgrade your code and take advantage of the new features. And it was simple. Well, then they did that exact same messaging for this thing called GA4, right? Google Analytics 4. And then they did this. I'm going to flip into mine really quickly because it's just going to be easier to see when you see everything. So we'll come into, this one is fine. This is our universal analytics, right? So then they came in and said, oh, well, we're going to create this. When you go to create a property, like, what happened? And they're like, oh, create this Google Analytics 4 thing. So when they did this upgrade announcement, which was October, November of last year, somewhere around there, they said, oh, it's an upgrade. There were agencies, big, gigantic agencies. And if you're in this group, don't feel bad because you're not the only one that turned off Universal Analytics and turned on Google Analytics 4 thinking, oh, it's just an upgrade because that's how Google kind of sold it. But it is not an upgrade. It is a completely separate platform that you must use in parallel because of how complicated it is. Now, that said, they flipped it right back on a few days later when they realized their mistakes. And there was like hundreds of millions of dollars of ad spend that was not recorded. It was pretty bad. But that's the messaging problem. So now to set this up, what Google's really been doing is that they're pushing people into GA4 by making it like the thing you set up. So if you come into Google Analytics new, if you're a new user, all you know is Google Analytics 4. You don't know that Universal's hidden right back here under this advanced options, right? You just know there's Google Analytics 4. So to you, your Google Analytics 4 looks totally different than anybody else's. So there's that problem's happening with the newbies coming on. But the bigger problem is this used to be called, for those that are familiar, about a year ago, App and Web. In fact, our first original course of this, so it's, again, third time in a year, I want to emphasize. We're trying to keep this up to date. This is the hardest one to do it with. But it used to be called App plus Web. That's what it was. And App plus Web properties, nobody ever used because everybody saw it and said, well, I don't have an app. So why would I want app plus web? And that wasn't Google's intention. That was just a bad marketing move. So then I assume the marketing team came in and said, listen, you know, I understand the developers think this is app and web. And the idea is that you can now have everything under one platform, which is great, but nobody has apps. And so they're not adopting the new platform. So we need to rename it. They renamed it to Google Analytics 4, which of course confused everybody because everyone's like, what happened to 1, 2, and 3? But whatever, right? So technically 3 is Universal Analytics. So you might see some people referencing GA3, but that's Universal Analytics. So now there's GA4. Now we are here. And but this whole miscommunication and the rollout is googly. It's what happens, you know, it's what happens in the tech world. And we're kind of like this. We're like, hey, get good enough to get going, come back and make it better later. We'll clean up the mess as we go. And they pushed it out to the market. So it came out as App and Web. Then it got renamed to GA4. And then people in the know kind of mistook it because they thought it was an upgrade. Then we realized it wasn't an upgrade. And that's what's happened this year so far is people realize, okay, not an upgrade. We got to do both. So you keep using Universal. That's the one that's your production platform. That's the one that feeds Data Studio. That's the one you make decisions off of right now when it comes to trends and patterns while you are learning GA4, which is going to take you a good 6 months. Like, don't think this is like a couple of weeks and then I'm going to be, I'm going to be an expert at this. You won't, because there's always going to be new things coming out. There's a few limitations that won't be there in the future, so you'll think that stuff will start to change, but you got to practice it now and give yourself a good 6 months before you start going, okay, now it's good enough to be a production source of data. And that's when you flip it into Data Studios now taking GA4 data and building out your trends and patterns. Going back to the original question, which is like, okay, a lot of people probably aren't realizing just how big this is. Yes. What's going to happen, here's my guess, total guess. But you know how I'm big into forecasting. So this is my forecast. For 2022, there will be some announcement from Google. And it might even be later toward this year where they talk about privacy stuff. So the privacy aspects of this are going to be monumental. And this will be the only platform that can handle privacy. It's part of the reason I think they're trying to push away from Universal because it just can't do the level of detail that they needed to do. They needed a whole new platform to do it. So they're going to make some sort of deprecation announcement and it will cause mass panic. And at that point, you will see users, the end users, the clients, right, start jumping in here to try to do it themselves. And they will think it's just like it was last time. Same reports, but better. And so then they will jump into GA4 and realize, okay, this is a whole other world, and they will scream for help. So all of that was a very long-winded way of saying massive, massive, massive business opportunity to get ahead and start branding yourselves as really good at GA4 and understanding GA4 because it is a constantly evolving platform. So everyone's kind of on the cutting edge that's using it at this point because that's all there is the cutting edge. And then as you get more and more used to it, you'll start, you'll be ahead of the curve and there will be a massive wave of new people who are trying to figure this out. It really is, Dina's saying it's an exciting opportunity. It 100% is going to be that. Jessica's saying that's why she's here. She can't do it on her own. Yeah, it's exactly right. It's exactly right. So I'll just say never expect Google to be good at naming things. They try. So they got two bad reputations right now: is naming and killing products that people love. So hopefully but they won't be doing that with GA4 because that is their baby. Let's see. Bilal was asking, so we'll be doing a chapter on connecting GA4 to Google Ads. We'll do a little bit of that in customization in lesson 2 tomorrow. We'll be talking about that. So I'll show you kind of where that is. Again, not that big of a deal. It was one of the cool things about GA4 is a lot of the settings that were a little complicated that you had to sort of connect GTM when you had to involve Tag Manager with, or make custom code changes on the pages. If you were using the normal scripts, they don't exist anymore. So GA4, there's kind of like, it understands and was built for something like cross domain as an example, which is, like everybody crosses domain nowadays through the journey. This is what happens. And this platform is sort of built to handle it all in-house, which is really nice. So we'll talk more about this tomorrow, in lesson 2 as we go through and get into, some of the specifics of it. But really good questions. Yes, we will be doing that. All right. Any other questions, comments, concerns? I don't see anything in chat. I don't see any hands raised. But of course, if there are any, and if you're an Academy member, just use Ask Instructor Support as you are going through this, and you can reference the lesson and then think, hey, we're even stuff like, hey, we're going to be covering this, that, or the other thing. Now's the time. Because if there was something that I wasn't going to cover, I've got time to add it in there. So we've got the 5 lessons between now and Friday. But remember, the general schedule is tomorrow will be activating it, which is essentially is creating a property, turning it on. And then we will be doing customization of it, which is the cross-domain stuff. And I'll show you about connecting accounts like Google Ads. So that stuff will be addressed during lesson 2. In lesson 3, in fact, what I'm going to do very quickly here is reset my deck. If I can get out of that. Ready to go to here. I'm going to do a deeper dive through the schedule. So this is what we're doing tomorrow, right? This stuff, the GA4 Foundations. On Wednesdays is to answer Andron's question. He's saying, what about e-commerce? We will be doing e-commerce on Wednesday. So conversions in e-commerce. Conversions are basically the new goals. So Google Analytics, Universal Analytics called them goals. There are no more goals. So we're going to have ACE conversions, I guess. I'll probably still use the term goals because it makes sense from a user's perspective, but now they are set up as conversion events. So we'll talk about those. And then, of course, e-commerce, because there's a few tricks to that. We will be using Tag Manager for this stuff, by the way. So make sure you have your Tag Manager skills up. Oops, let me go back. And then in lesson 4, I'm going too fast. There we go. In lesson 4, we will be going into the deep dive of the reports. So really using the reports and pulling in some insights from them. We're going to model what essentially is the source meaning report from Universal Analytics and kind of show you what those look like and how to read them. Because they're not that far off, but they're definitely different. And there's things that are gone that are actually, I think, a massive improvement. Like one thing they got rid of was bounce rate. No longer exists, which is great. It's actually a really good thing. They call it engaged sessions now, which is a much better thing. And we'll get into more positive reasons of why GA4 is such a great platform on Thursday. And then on Friday, on Thursday, we're kind of just talk about the explorations and show you the different types. But on Friday, we will be doing a deep dive. And we're going to show 3 specific explorations. So we're going to talk about how to build paths, how to build the exploration reports. They call these freeform reports now. Again, renamed 2 months ago. They were called explorations. Now they're called freeform. So, I'm saying some of this so that everybody's watching this in the future. And it's like, well, it doesn't call that anymore. It's subject to change, right? This platform is changing very quickly. 3rd time in a year we've done this, and I expect there to be more. And then we'll do the funnels report as well, which I think is the coolest one because the funnels is, golly, it's just so flexible. And it's fantastic. And because everything's an event, you don't have to do it all on page views anymore. You can say, I want to see people that saw a certain page, clicked on a result, and then became a type of member. It gets fantastic. But because of these exploration reports, it can affect how you name things in your events. So we'll talk about that again on Friday's deep dive. So that's what we are covering. If anybody has any suggestions on something, or if they want to see if something's specifically covered, you can definitely use Ask Instructor Support in there. Just say, hey, this is for Mercer, for W.I.N GA4 Basics, and the instructors will get it to me to make sure that I am addressing it. And if I'm not, because remember, part of this is I realize there are some people who already have some basic skills with GA4. Most, I'm assuming, don't. That's what this course is really made for, people who are just starting out with this stuff. So that's really who it's made for. But I want to give enough where we can see this something that's going to be useful and get you to the next level without going down the rabbit hole, because that will be, I am positive, there will be a WIN Google Analytics 4 Beyond Basics course that we do later, but my guess is not until later part of 2022, because I fully expect to have to redo this one again within 6 months, because I figured the interface is going to change, the reports are going to change, they'll make it easier to use in some way, shape, or form, and we'll go from there. Dean is asking, are all the trainings 1 p.m. Eastern for Academy members? Yes, that is true. Remember, if you're watching this on YouTube, we gave lesson 1, but that's it. The other lessons are not. The only exception, Dina, is 3 p.m. Eastern on Fridays, because Friday I just have another standing call with our certified measurement marketers that I can't miss. So on Fridays, we do it at 3 p.m. Eastern. Otherwise, traditionally, 1 p.m. Eastern. Thank you, Andron, for that note. He said, except for Friday. So every day, 1 p.m. Eastern, Monday through Thursday. On Fridays at 3 p.m. Eastern will be the live training. Now, remember, if you can't make it live, Academy members, you'll see the replays. We'll have the replays in the members area. Then they will all be edited down, not this week, but starting next week. They'll be edited down into the student editions, which are the ones that you sort of see the finished product. So you'll get that as well. All right. So with that, I think we can officially bring this one to a close. It's been a lot of good questions. Thank you for all of that. Let me bring up the right slide. Okay, perfect. Well, thanks everybody. Appreciate you joining us for WIN Google Analytics 4 Basics. And again, practice, get into the demo store. It's not hard to do that. So measure.tips/GA demo will take you directly to the link, access the account, play around with it. Just get familiar with it. Don't worry about using it. Don't worry about pulling insights from it. Just poke around, get excited to see what's back there, and kind of get your brain's juices started with like, I wonder what this does. I wonder what that does. I'll have to ask them about that later. That's the sort of stuff that we're going to be talking about in the rest of the WIN. All right, that's it. We are officially over. Thanks everybody for joining us for WIN Google Analytics 4 Basics. We will see you on the next lesson. Take care.